The greatest mistake my birth parents made was assuming that good riddance was a legally binding document. I was 8 years old, not 5, and it wasn't a mall, it was a cheap boarding school in rural Vermont. My parents, Arthur and Gwen, dropped me off one September morning promising to return for the holidays. They never did. They simply redirected their mail, disconnected their phones, and vanished. They didn't leave me money. They left a 2-page letter stating they were moving abroad and were transferring all parental responsibilities to the school. I was left to the care of the school's eccentric owner, a retired forensic accountant named Elias Thorne. He wasn't kind, but he was ruthlessly fair. He saw me as an unexpected problem, yet he raised me with rigid discipline, a profound respect for financial integrity, and a deep understanding of contract law. I spent my childhood not playing with toys, but studying Elias' old tax codes and case files. When Elias Thorne died 20 years later, I inherited the only thing that mattered to him: his defunct accounting firm, his private property, a dusty New England farmhouse, and one peculiar legal asset, a little-known tax loophole related to familial debt. The monetary value was initially small, maybe $50,000, but the legal knowledge was priceless. That's when Arthur and Gwen, my biological parents, reappeared. They didn't return for an inheritance. They returned to claim me, or rather, to claim the intellectual property they believed I held. They had gotten into deep financial trouble in their new country, and desperately needed a bailout. They saw my thriving consultancy firm, built on Elias' foundation, and my newly published book on corporate tax law, and they decided their long-lost daughter was their golden ticket. They contacted me, not with remorse, but with a predatory demand for millions in familial support for their retirement. They dragged me into the Supreme Court, not as a defendant, but as a witness in a complex civil fraud case. They were attempting to leverage my firm's knowledge to pull off a massive legal maneuver against a former business partner, and they needed me to testify that I, as their daughter, was the legitimate heir to the specialized tax knowledge they claimed they taught me. I stood on the witness stand, watching them across the courtroom. They smiled, confident that their elaborate, rehearsed lies about a loving childhood and shared professional history would sell the jury. They believed they were using me, the prodigy they had created and cast aside, to steal a fortune. The opposing counsel, a sharp litigator named Mr. Denton, finished his main line of questioning and walked back to his table. Arthur and Gwen smirked at me one last time. They thought the hard part was over. Then the presiding judge Maria Chavez looked at me and asked the final, standard question. Ms. Harlow, do you have anything to add to your testimony regarding your relationship with the plaintiffs, Arthur and Gwen? I looked directly at my birth parents. I took a breath. I didn't say, "Good morning, Judge," or reveal a secret legal career. I did something far more devastating. I used the single legal asset Elias Thorne had given me. "Yes, Your Honor," I stated, my voice measured and calm. "I do. I need to enter into the record this document. Exhibit 42, the Child Support Lien and Recovery Act of 1990, Section 301B. The room went silent. Arthur and Gwen's faces turned to stone. They knew that statute, they didn't know I knew it. I then addressed the court, my gaze never leaving my parents. Your Honor, the plaintiffs testified that they transferred full parental responsibility to the school in 1998. This action, while effectively abandonment, did not absolve them of financial liability under state law. Since 1998, they have failed to provide a single dollar of legally mandated support, education, or medical costs, all of which were borne by the estate of Elias Thorne. I paused, letting the implication hang. Therefore, I must inform the court that 2 weeks ago, as the sole heir and executor of Mr. Thorne's estate, I filed a retroactive claim against the plaintiffs for the full cost of my upbringing and education. The total amount, with statutory interest, is $1.8 million. I continued, my voice now cutting through the silence. Furthermore, based on the specialized tax loophole Mr. Thorne left me, that entire debt, Your Honor, is legally considered a prior lien on all future financial assets and settlements belonging to the plaintiffs, including any judgment they hope to win today. Arthur scrambled to his feet, yelling, "This is illegal, she can't do that." Judge Chavez slammed her gavel down. "Ms. Harlow, are you stating that any financial award granted to the plaintiffs in this case would immediately be transferred to you to satisfy a pre-existing lien?" "Yes, Your Honor, the lien was perfected last Friday." I watched Arthur and Gwen collapse into their seats. They hadn't come back to sue me. They had inadvertently established a massive financial asset, their eventual civil judgment, which I had legally claimed before they even won it. They didn't just lose their case. They bankrupted themselves, proving to the court that they were financially entitled to win money, only for that money to be immediately transferred to the child they abandoned. They had returned to steal money, and instead, they had simply handed me the bill for my childhood. And the law, the one thing they thought they could manipulate, had delivered the final, crippling invoice. I had been raised by a forensic accountant, and the only revenge worth having is one calculated to the penny.